Welcome into live draft coverage here at the FFPC. Board is off to a hot start, Balky. Board is already going, and I'm a little scrolled way too far down. I'm your host, Aiden LaCour. Normally, when this man Eric Balkman is on, he's the host. We're swapping roles today a little bit. Balky, how are you feeling? Are you excited to see where Jonathan Taylor falls tonight?
Well, that's the big conversation, right? I mean, I expected to have some players that were kind of fringe picks be cut today, and we saw one of those for sure in Dwayne McBride, a player that a lot of people had been drafting in the high stakes industry for months, basically since the NFL draft, and even quite frankly prior to the NFL draft. I did not think we would get as big of a news story as we did with Jonathan Taylor, but I think the smart and sharp high-stakes players out there will tell you that, Balky, look, a lot of us saw this coming, and we've already prepared for it. It's going to be a fun draft tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an odd situation in that there was a lot of smoke, I would say, in the last 24 hours where there was part of me like, oh, the trade is a realistic possibility, which I don't think a lot of people expected when the trade demand and the holdout and the trade request kind of being granted almost and or allowing Taylor to search came into effect. I don't think people anticipated a move happening. But then again, last 24 hours, there's some rumblings. Oh, this might be real. The Colts feel like they're in the worst spot in all this. I can't speak for you, but it just feels like a very weird spot in which they might be able to go the whole year. Excuse me, Jonathan Taylor might be able to go the whole year and just not play a game and still accrue enough games technically under his belt to count for a full season, and then he'd be a free agent. And the Colts, I guess, could franchise him and run this all back. But do you think Jonathan Taylor, one, plays at all for the Indianapolis Colts this season? And then two, if he doesn't, if you're saying the answer is no, does he get moved? Is this just a full season holdout? What do you think the most likely outcome is of this situation?
I think he plays. I know there's reports out there, and plenty of people smarter than me are saying that there's a non-zero chance that he just skips the whole season. In fact, some people are saying it's likely he skips the whole season now that the Colts did not trade him. I don't think that's going to be the case. NFL season, as much as we love it because it's short and we want to soak up all that goodness as much as we can, it is kind of a grind. So he may feel differently in week 5 when he comes off the PUP list than he does now and decide to play. The Colts obviously can change their mind, and when he comes off the PUP list in week 5, they could just move him then. So I don't know if there's a most likely outcome here other than to say that he probably will play at some point this season. For who? I'm not so sure. That remains up for debate.
First round kind of wrapping up here. Again, as we've seen with most, we gone a bit, at least when I've been on these live draft coverage, we've had a true kind of surprise first round. It's pretty stable in terms of the names. But I kind of wanted to ask you, not just the names who've been drafted today, but just in your personal opinion, of the guys who are consistently going in kind of the back half of the first round, who's the name you think is kind of most, not undervalued because it's first round capital, but you think has the highest chance to kind of finish as a top 3 fantasy player of this kind of first 12 to 15 names that we see drafted in the FFPC FantasyPros Championship?
I mean, back half of the round, I mean, I would say Bijan Robinson definitely is a prime candidate to finish as a top 3 running back. After that, I would probably say Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's tough for me to make a case for Garrett Wilson because I think that, and this is coming from me, a Packers fan, I think that things are getting a little inflated in New York of how good the offense is going to be and how good the Jets are going to be in general. I could easily see the Jets, being slightly above average and a lot of people being disappointed with that as well. So it's tough for me to say Garrett Wilson. Devontae Adams, I have obviously always liked as a fantasy player because of his high target share, but now he's got a new quarterback this year. We know he's not happy playing out there. So top 3 is on the table more so with him than Wilson, but I don't know if he gets there. CeeDee Lamb, I'm a little bit nervous about the new running backs or the new offensive coordinator. Yeah, thank you, with Brian Schottenheimer there, where I think the running backs could be the stars of the show there. So I can't say Lamb. I would say for a receiver, it's probably Bijan, or it's probably Amon-Ra St. Brown and probably Bijan Robinson for a running back. I know Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb just went off the board. I didn't grab those guys in any of my drafts this year. Not saying that they can't have a big year, but top 3 for 2 players that are typically not picked or typically do not catch a lot of passes. It's going to be difficult for them to get up there. Tony Pollard, there's a chance of that. We just saw him go off the board to Frankie Bornoni here at the 204. I could see a top 3 season from him. Although it comes down to Robinson or Pollard, I'd be betting on Robinson over Pollard.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good points. The thing about CD that's interesting is CD is the second half of last year was a top 3 receiver in fantasy, but there's the fact that that's within Kellen Moore's offense. Who knows? Mike McCarthy wants to run the ball probably even more. Schottenheimer comes in. There's just some uncertainty there. CD, I think he's a very safe pick, and by no means do I think he'll under deliver on his ADP.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that ceiling might be a little bit more capped than it should be for someone coming off kind of the finish that he had last year. And then you do mention Wilson. I think I talked about it on the main event coverage. The offensive line concerns in New York for Aaron Rodgers is real, and you might be the best to talk about it. I mean, Rodgers is coming from Green Bay, where at least from what my understanding and my knowledge is that he's had great offensive lines in Green Bay, and now he comes to New York, and yes, he has Breece Hall and Dalvin in the backfield and an elite receiver by all accounts, and Garrett Wilson and a young rising one. But he's going to have to get the ball out quick, and that O-line is going to cause struggles. He could be trying to scramble, and that's not what you want 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers to be doing in New York.
Yeah, and I don't know if he can do it anymore. Like, he looked slow the last couple of years in Green Bay. His rushing attempts and rushing yards has gone way down. And I think that's, again, when we talk about the Jets and how positive people are about them, I think that's an underreported thing, is that offensive line situation. The other guy that I don't think anybody out there is saying that he could be a top 3 guy for a non-first round pick. Went again tonight, earlier than I'd take him, 208. He goes to Jim Herezi's squad, Primetime Bronze here in the 5-hole. Normally 301 on the Mojo over the last couple of days. Shout out to Darren Armani at Fantasy Mojo on X, fantasymojo.com. Check him out. Get a subscription. It's worth it. Calvin Ridley tonight at the 208, about a half round ahead of where he normally goes. Man, the sky's the limit for this guy coming up into Las Vegas. I don't know what people are going to be capable of with him out there.
Balky, you and me have done multiple shows together as kind of like a duo this season, and every show, I think the last one we did might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was always, Jahmyr Gibbs, when is his rise going to start? You and me would always say Jahmyr Gibbs. We were wrong. It was, if there was one guy who come Vegas would be going kind of mid to early second, it was Calvin Ridley was the guy. We both thought it would be Jahmyr Gibbs as kind of that riser from the early 4th, late 3rd up into the mid to or early 2nd. But it was Calvin Ridley. I mean, he got targeted, had some good plays in preseason. I believe led the team in targets when the starters were on the field. Yeah, it's just the sky really is the limit. I'm buying his talent. In some ways, he was beat up his last year that we actually saw him with injuries. So I think there is something to be said that as a player, it's a lot, but he got it. Hopefully, you're hoping, because it is a lot. He hopefully gets his mental health right, and the time off could honestly help his body in some ways. Someone who was kind of dealing with a lot of injuries the last time we saw him, and he's coming to an explosive offense with a ascending quarterback. I do think the sky's the limit, and I mean, I think you, if I might be recalling incorrectly, but I believe you were one who was kind of, you always thought you were a Christian Kirk guy. The ADP's only separated, and there's been some stuff in the preseason about Kirk's usage. I still think he's a solid pick, but I think Ridley's ceiling is way higher, and he's well worth maybe that floor for someone who's been off for almost 2 years.
Kirk is a guy, I wouldn't classify myself as a Kirk guy, but when I see the ADP, I become a Kirk ADP guy. Like,
sure.
To me,
no, and that's sometimes what it is. Yeah. It's sometimes ADP. What are your thoughts? I was a little bit surprised. You have Mojo up. I'm trying to find it. What has Mixon's ADP been? Because 309, he goes at the 212. Then they go Najee too. 2 interesting picks there by Team One. I'm a little bit surprised because those are 2 guys. Najee Harris is someone who I do worry the Jaylen Warren workload. To me, is just a legitimate concern as someone who's just not a fan of Najee Harris as a football player, even though I know the volume might be there. Joe Mixon's a weird one for me to grasp, and I'd love your opinion, because he's someone who the Bengals don't really have anyone else there, as much as Chris Evans supposedly is the number 2. That's not a threat. Mixon was banged up at times last year, but then he has the controversies with multiple court cases, but he's in an elite offense, and he's the only guy there. He's just a weird person for me to try and place and be comfortable drafting. I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say about Mixon.
Dallas Gowers, who is drafting in the 1 spot tonight, is getting his guys. That's what you got to do, especially at this point in the season, where ADP becomes so prevalent. Sometimes it's a crutch for a lot of us, and we end up drafting our teams more for ADP rather than drafting our teams more for what we want on them. You're at the 1 spot. If you're Dallas Gowers, you know that you cannot get Mixon coming back. You know that maybe there's a chance you get Najee Harris back, but if you are a believer in him, I can see why you'd take him now. Joe Mixon has the ADP in the Fantasy Pros Championship over the last 2 days up as 309, so almost a full round ahead of where he normally goes. Najee Harris goes at the 301. He normally goes at the 403. So again, a player that he's probably not making back to you, but if you like those running backs to pair with Jefferson, sometimes you got to go grab them. Even if it's a full round ahead or almost a full round ahead of where these players normally go. It is strange to see those guys being drafted ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. We've seen Gibbs climb quite a bit. He goes up to 304 tonight. It's definitely weird to see him drafted ahead of Jonathan Taylor. However, with the new normal that we're living in right now with Taylor being on the pup, it's going to be completely the usual to see Mixon, Harris, and a bunch of other running backs go ahead of Jonathan Taylor.
What are your thoughts? Team 2, an interesting build. I'd be intrigued to see how common it is. I'm sure it's not the first one, but a Kelsey Mahomes stack, and then Mark Andrews kind of slides just a bit. He normally goes at the 208, as you were saying the last couple of days, but it goes at the 302 today. That's a real interesting build. You have 2 elite tight ends, and then probably going to be the QB1 in Patrick Mahomes this year, or at least his floor is probably QB3. You're in that stack with Kelsey is obviously uber popular, as we discussed. That's a real interesting build.
A fascinating build. We oftentimes will talk about how the Kelsey Mahomes stack, is a little bit overrated, right? Because so many people have it right now. But when you throw in this monkey wrench of Mark Andrews into it as well, it becomes a lot more interesting to see all 3 of those players on the same team. Obviously, a lot of people who are drafting Kelsey early will look away and not draft a tight end there because they already have an elite tight end, right? But if they go with an elite tight end there, now you not only have 2 of them, you have the 2 top ones being drafted in the Fantasy Pros Championship. So yeah, it's not. There are not a lot of teams out there that have it, and there's one more of them that has it now. In fact, I think I'm looking at this. I could be wrong if I'm using the stack finder right on Fantasy Mojo. I see only one team prior to this draft that had a Mahomes, Kelsey, Andrew stack, and that's what Team 2 led off with tonight. Team 2 is of course Jeff Conklin, who was drafting that. So good on him. Fun to see. And now it'll be fun to see how everybody else handles the tight ends in this draft, knowing that the top 2 are off the board at the 302, and they're both to the same team.
Yeah, it's also if as you said, only one previously existed in the format. It's also hard to get these unique stacks of these first 3 rounds this late in the draft season. Sometimes you may see that kind of early on when the contest first opened, all the way back in the spring. But here, it's an impressive question for us in the chat. John H was asking, what was the earliest Tony Pollard has gone in this format? The 107 is the earliest he has gone over the last 2 days. The latest he's gone is the 208. So kind of a 1-round range there. As Balky said earlier in the show, a guy who he sees him and Bijan were the 2 names of kind of that late first, early second round guys who could break into the top 3 overall in fantasy. The Najee's going to be a stud. See, it's always interesting to read the comments because there's such trends you see, and there's been so many people against Najee, right? And in some ways, we always talk about it, but the Josh Jacobs effect almost, in that sometimes going against the grain when so many people are against a player, as so many people were against Josh Jacobs and his ADP kept dropping. And there were some people who were consistently taking him, and it paid off big time. I'm not a Najee Harris believer, but there's the pathway for the volume and maybe even an improved offense, the better passing game. There could be more scoring opportunities. Who knows? It's just there's so many things that concern me with Najee, which is why I'm not personally on him. But there is those factors, and I think Josh Jacobs is a perfect example of players who a large portion of the community is against, and the people who do like them, it benefits them greatly as they have high volume with them.
I just real quick, I looked up the other draft, and it was a Kelsey, Andrews, Mahomes stack from the third pick. In the only other time it's happened in the Fantasy Pros Championship. So now we've got two of them. And as Acuna Jr. 13 points out in the YouTube chat, Jeff Conklin won the big prize along with a co-manager back in 2014. So he knows what he's doing. And maybe he repeats with this team. That'd be fun. Or not repeats, but maybe wins it again.
Wins it again? No, they're saying it's he first or second place. They were saying they
second place. Okay,
so second place, but no, for sure. I mean, with that start, that is again this tight end premium, and I was really we brought it up because as you said, there's only been one other in this entire format. Someone was asking if Najee's a reach. All depends, as Bulky kind of pointed out. It's a go get your guy time.
Yeah.
But he normally goes, I believe we said at the 403. So
correct.
About a round reach on Najee. But again, it goes back to if Team One is a believer in Najee Harris, and you're going to see this, especially as we get in late, you just go get your guy. Najee, more than likely, if you play your odds, is not coming back to you at the 412. So if you want him, go get him. Terp, I kind of wanted to ask you about Aaron
I'm not sure if I'm bulky.
That's
should I take it as a compliment or an insult?
I mean,
some people would say I should take it as an insult.
The thing is, I've done so many of these live streams with Terp. It's almost like muscle memory to me. Like, Terp is just always to my right on my screen. That is a tough
what's
look.
funny? When Farrell and I do the HSFF hour on Fridays, there's been a couple of times where I almost called him Terp. I didn't actually do it, but I was pretty close several times. So I totally get it.
It's funny with your beard and then Farrell's hair. Confusing both of you guys for Terp is just not the greatest look for me as a host right now. But I wanted to ask you because it's almost for my sake as well. I just want to hear give you a little bit of a soapbox moment to hype up Aaron Jones again, because the Packers offense, I'm sure you were watching, looked pretty good in the preseason. Jordan Love looked more confident than he's done in past preseasons by all accounts. Offensive line should be pretty good again. And again, they have a super young receiving core, which leads me to believe they're going to rely on that run game and even Aaron Jones in the passing game. He goes at the 402 because of you and how much you have hyped him up, rightfully so. He normally goes at the 408. I do still feel like he's a guy who's being slightly undervalued by drafters, maybe just because he's not the sexiest name in fantasy anymore.
A lot of times what we'll see this time of year where, God, how many days are we away from the final day of drafting season? 12 days or whatever it is. That's all we have. There's a lot of people that have been drafting numerous teams all summer long. There's other teams that have been drafting teams over the last few weeks or whatever. And then there's a few teams that are drafting their first time teams of the year right now. Mm-hmm. And those first two categories, a lot of them are going kind of all over the place to make sure that they're balancing out their portfolio, that they're making sure they're not underweight or overweight on any players they're either fading or targeting. And so you will see stuff jump around. I mean, you saw it last year in Las Vegas when we do these big payback and high society leagues. I mean, people will go up and grab a player that they know they probably won't be able to get coming back that will be well ahead of ADP, and that's fine. That's what you have to do. So you'll see some interesting stuff going forward here. I think Aaron Jones at the 402, about a half round ahead of where he normally goes, is a prime example of that. Aaron Jones is a guy that I feel every year people think that, it's weird. Like people always thought, I don't want Aaron Jones on my team. That's Aaron Rodgers' offense. He's going to drive it, and he's going to be throwing to Adams and all this other stuff. And Jones is sort of an afterthought. And now that Jordan Love has taken over, there are a lot of people out there saying, the Packers' offense is going to suck because they don't have Aaron Rodgers anymore. So Aaron Jones is he's just going to be, a guy that gets forgotten about. And well, I think that could be true. You're also talking about a guy who is coming off a career high in receptions and receiving yards. AJ Dillon, I've never been an AJ Dillon guy. So for anybody who's saying I'm just a Packers homer, and this is what I'm saying, is I've never been an AJ Dillon guy. As cool of a person as he seems to be, I don't like him for fantasy. Have not drafted him in years on any of my teams. What's interesting today with on cutdown day, Emmanuel Wilson, the Packers third string running back, he led the NFL in rushing this preseason. The Packers actually kept him. And I find that interesting because last year they only kept two running backs, in Jones and Dillon, because of the new rules with the practice squads. It's very easy for them to call up a third running back. That's not the case this year. They're keeping three running backs on their team, Jones, Dillon, and Wilson. Now, does that mean that They're going to manage Jones's reps, and he's not going to be involved as much as he has in the offense before. I would lean towards saying, no, we don't want to overreact to this Wilson stuff, but it is a little interesting. So for me, I still think Jones is a value, but now you're getting up into the early fourth, late third round. At that point, I don't know how much of a value he is anymore.
For sure. I think it's also very dependent on the build. I think Team 11, it's a fine pick, but especially for those teams that maybe start off with a 2 receivers and a tight end or 3 receivers, and then you're getting Aaron Jones in the 4th round. I think that's a very fine, more than fine start as your kind of your RB1 with the kind of the upside he does possess is just maybe a guy who does gobble up a ton of receptions from Love as kind of a check down safety option. And then again, you're also running behind a really good offensive line. And then who knows what LaFleur is going to do relative to kind of easing Love in. They could throw him right into the fire. They could be kind of run heavy with kind of maybe Watson as only target, because that receiving core, is there any receiver who's going to get legitimate game time who has more than a year of experience?
For the Packers?
Yeah. Because Reed, Watson,
there's
Dobbs,
not. There's not.
Yeah, I don't think there's even one on the roster.
Watson and Dobbs are obviously coming into their second year. Dobbs, who's dealing with a hamstring issue right now, and then Jaden Reed, who's probably going to be the slot guy. The other guys that are coming off the bench are Samori Toure, who was a 7th-round pick last year, Dontavian Wicks, who was a 4th-round pick this year, and then an undrafted rookie in Malik Heath, who has showed out in the preseason. But these guys are all going to grow together. You still have Musgrave and Kraft, obviously, at tight ends as well. It's interesting. Watson goes tonight at the 4-11 as the number 1 wide receiver for Jeff Conklin. And I've been on the record on this program for months saying that I thought the value was Dobbs over Christian Watson.
Sure.
And then because Matt Schneidman, who covers the Packers for The Athletic, he was asked who's going to lead the Packers in receptions this year. And he said, well, if you're talking receptions, I think it's Dobbs. And so I was kind of like Team Dobbs because he was going like 6 or 7 rounds later. Now he's getting pumped up a little bit, and Watson is falling. It's just real slightly. Maybe he's not even falling. Maybe he's definitely not moving up. And then this past weekend, he's stabilized. Yeah, this past weekend when I was in Kentucky for the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, drafting a bunch of teams, I maybe got 1 Dobbs team, but I had I think 2 or 3 Watson teams. So it's like a do as I say, not as I do type thing, where I was saying one thing and doing another. But I think I don't want to say the experience is overrated, but these guys are going to put up numbers this year. I think Jordan Love is going to be all right. He's going to be good. Look good in preseason, sometimes against first-string defenses too. So I think he's going to be okay. And I think as a result, Watson, Dobbs, and even Jaden Reed to a certain extent, I think they might all come through and pay off on their draft slots.
And I nearly called you Turp again. I'm like,
I know it's ridiculous.
It's Balky. I'm sure your experience as one of our commissioning all these leagues. We're in the busy part. The brains are fried. We're fantasy.
Right
now.
Yeah.
But what are the odds of this? Evan Donovan in the chat. He's the other Mahomes, Andrews, and Kelsey.
How wild is
combo.
That?
Not
how
happy.
Wild is that?
I mean, I'm almost surprised that it happened a bit more, because we saw, especially when some of these contests opened, we saw Andrews going kind of in that mid to early 3rd. But as I think you said, it's just the idea of teams, once they get Kelsey and Mahomes, they're just kind of done with the tight end position. Mm-hmm. They don't need to. But yeah, I mean, I'm loving Team 2's start. Just as I do like Watson. That's partly, again, just being so heavily invested in this kind of fantasy football high stakes community, and everyone loves Christian Watson. And then also Brandon Ayuk, I think, is a talent in San Francisco. Although I do have concerns about just trying to figure out week to week of Kittle, Debo, and Ayuk who's going to be the one, because I think it could alternate. But that's a really good start there for Team 2. Where are you at on 2 guys who I think I've been seeing kind of get compared in terms of J.K. Dobbins and Javonte Williams? Because I believe you were early on, you liked Samaje, correct?
Yes, absolutely, I did.
And then has that shifted for you? And then I want to also talk about Dobbins, because I've been seeing the comparisons in some people are saying Dobbins got not as much buzz as Javonte, but some of this buzz coming off the knee injury from 2 years ago. And then last summer, J.K. Dobbins got a lot of buzz. Oh, he's looking good in camp. He'll be back. And then he dealt with kind of the return from the knee injury kind of all year and struggled until kind of the end of the season when he finished strong. But where are you at? Let's start with Javonte now, with all the positive reports. Even I think personally, I still think it's going to take him some time to ease back into it. It's just tough. I don't know how much of a workload, but Sean Payton running backs always produce for fantasy. Where are you at on Javonte Williams at his ADP versus Samaje?
I am okay. So I changed the narrative a little bit or not the narrative, but my thoughts on the situation a little bit when it was announced that Williams was going to be starting training camp and he was going to be practicing on day one, which is kind of mind-blowing. Then Sean Payton said he was going to play in the preseason, which is even more mind-blowing. And then we found out that he was only going to receive about 12 snaps, and he received more than that in that preseason game, caught like 4 passes on 5 targets, like something insane like that. It was crazy. And so at that point, I'm like, why is Javonte Williams ADP not rising? Like it should be rising, and it's not for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So then I became a Javonte Williams guy.
Okay.
Now, I understanding that this knee injury, it's all fine and good for him to be practicing and doing all these things right now, but it's another thing to actually beat medical science. And medical science said that this was a horrific knee injury. It was more than just an ACL tear, right? So it's one thing for me to think like, hey, this is, it's wheels up for Javonte Williams, but it's another thing to understand, like, even if he's playing now, it doesn't mean he's going to have the type of Javonte Williams capital letters season we've seen before. So we do have to still be concerned about the injury. The thing for me is when he was going as late as he was, then he became a buy for me, and I got him in a few drafts this past weekend as well. Samaje Perine, I still don't think there's anything wrong with him necessarily. What did the Broncos do at running back besides those two guys? Not much, right? And if that's the case, and you can get Samaje Perine in the 9th round, I don't care if the dude he's backing up is healthy. That'd be a good buy for Perine there. He's in the Dylan, Charbonnet, Warren, McKinnon, Bigsby territory. So a lot of these guys, injury away type guys. And that seems to be like a smart investment, whether the guy's coming off a torn ACL or whether he's not. Now, when you're talking about the ADP of those two guys versus each other, Samaje Perine 9-12, Javonte Williams, I just had it up and now I lost it, which of course it's what I do. It's really annoying. Javonte Williams 5'10", yeah. So Javonte Williams at running back 19. I still think that's a good price for him too. I don't think if I was drafting in the FantasyPros Championship, I'd be drafting both of them on the same team. I'd be picking my, a lane one way or the other and drafting that guy, and then trying to cash in on other people's injury away type guy running backs later on. I don't think if you want to say Williams or Perine is a good pick for you at those spots, I can't really disagree with you. I think you're right.
Bulky, it's happened. Kind of my big advertising today for all the show was see where Jonathan Taylor goes. He goes at the 601 RB 21. For some context, even with the uncertainty surrounding him, he was getting drafted over the last 2 days in this format as RB9. So he's fallen considerably now, knowing for sure he's missing the first 4 weeks of the season. There is, as you said, there is a greater than 0, more than that chance that he misses the entire season. Now, there's also a chance that he does end up suiting up for Indy and playing, or he gets traded at the October 31st trade deadline. But Jonathan Taylor, RB21, I know you gave me some thoughts at the start of the show, how you're thinking, but now that you kind of see his ADP, just give me kind of your instant reactions to Jonathan Taylor, 601, RB21.
Yeah, a couple of things here. Number one, let's talk about the team that took him. Jonathan Taylor is the 3rd running back drafted by Matthew Denolf's squad here in the 12 spot. Going with Stevenson and Breece Hall, he also has Wilson, Adams, and Lockett. Boy, a lot of ties to Wisconsin and Aaron Rodgers on this team. I'm just realizing all of a sudden. But I wonder if he made the decision that, okay, I'm going to take Stevenson and Hall here at this 3-4 turn. And if Jonathan Taylor's still out there when it comes back to me, I'm going to grab him, because if Hall's healthy and Taylor comes back week 5 and shows us more of the player that he was in 2021 rather than 2022, not only do I have a team that can contend and win this league, I have a team that can contend and win the $1 million with the prices that he got on those players if they hit. Does not have a tight end yet, does not have a quarterback. But when you can load up on depressed values this late in the season, it's pretty rare. And we're seeing this right now. Taylor is a perfect example. Not saying that I would do it, not saying that's the smart thing to do there. We were talking. I was talking with somebody, and I asked him like 2 or 3 days ago, where would you take Jonathan Taylor in your FFPC draft? And he kind of was just shrugging his shoulders, and I think he said, I don't know. I wouldn't consider him probably until like the 6th or 7th. And even then, I don't know if I'd take him there. Yeah. And this was before the announcement that he was going to be on the PUP list for the first 4 weeks. So this could be the high watermark. We don't know. We'll have to see what happens in other drafts later tonight and check the mojo in the morning to see where Taylor ended up going tonight. But 6'1" to me is it seems a little bit high for a guy that is guaranteed to miss the first 4 weeks of the season. But there's no doubting his talent. There's no denying his ability. And if you bet on the positives, that's a good way to bring home a 7-figure grand prize.
Maybe the only thing, and I'm going to ask you this question. You very well could tell me, Aiden, I've had so much fantasy mileage kind of on these tires. I have no idea. It's all kind of jumbled up. And my question is, it's only maybe think comparable. And what? Because I think I was a freshman in college when this happened. The whole Le'Veon holding out situation. Because up until that, like I assume it was somewhat similar because he was getting drafted still, at least in the leagues, again, at way smaller level back in college. But from all my research and knowledge back then, he was still getting drafted as kind of a first-round pick. And then kind of that last week before the season, it kind of hits like, oh, this guy's actually missing games. Do you have any recollection? I'll ask the chat, too, if they remember. What was kind of Le'Veon versus James Conner's ADPs back then? What was that, 2018? Is that like the only comparable thing in recent memory? Because the Taylor situation is one of the weirdest things for fantasy in terms of just uncertainty and just volatile ADP position and potential payouts down the line, depending on what happens.
I got to remember this. So I remember back in the day, Le'Veon Bell was still being drafted fairly high. And then we got deeper into drafting season, and a lot of people decided that they were going to be off. They're going to be off Le'Veon Bell. But other people still looked at it again as a buying opportunity. And Le'Veon Bell, and I do remember this too, he publicly stated that he was going to play during that season. And he said it more than once. And so a lot of people were drafting him based on, because the CBA was different back then.
There was like a target. He had to play like week 10 or week 8. I remember that.
I think it was week 10. And, at that point when we knew he wasn't going to be drafted, or we knew he wasn't going to play right away, then obviously he slipped significantly. But then when week 10 rolled around and he decided that he wasn't going to play when all these fantasy players who had drafted him were ready to unwrap their Le'Veon Bell presents, and then they found out that, no, it's not happening this year, you might as well cut him. It was shocking. It was jarring for a lot of people who planned their draft and planned their backfield around Bell coming back in week 10. And when that didn't happen, it was pretty shocking. Not so much that this guy decided to sit out a whole season, but he went on the record saying, yeah, I'm going to play this season. And when he didn't, it was pretty awful. I think there's some similarities here, although it's tough. And he got paid too, by the way. Let's not forget that. Yeah, it worked out for him. He got money. Not from the Steelers, but he got paid.
No.
I think that there are certain similarities here. The biggest difference between Taylor's situation and Bell's is that the CBA agreement is so different that sitting out a year it's really tough for that to work out for you if you're the running back in the long run and to get paid.
Yeah, I mean, Le'Veon Bell did kind of maybe irreparable damage to running backs with it, executing the holdout, signing a big contract, and then absolutely just not doing anything with it, not being anywhere near the running back he was in Pittsburgh, furthering the idea that maybe the offensive line is the important factor there. I just brought it up as it's just in my head, as Bryce Masters, a good friend, is you in the chat, our head commissioner at the FFPC mentioned he remembers it being anywhere from the first round to like the 4th round was his range on Le'Veon. And then I'm sure come Vegas, that might have been dropping even further because then it was kind of real that he was missing time. But it was just this idea of a running back who, when drafts open, was probably going in the 1st, 2nd round like Taylor was. And then there's uncertainty and he slips. And then it just keeps slipping and keeps slipping. We haven't seen anything probably like it since Bell. It's just, again, there's a lot of chances this offseason for that to happen with Saquon, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, J.K. Dobbins. We'll throw his name in there too. But all of them kind of went down. But Jonathan Taylor seems to be the one who's kind of standing his ground and not budging. And I'm sure Jim Irsay's kind of inflammatory remarks on it aren't helping that compared to the other situations.
Yeah, I mean that's the other wild card in this is nobody knows what Jim Irsay is capable of, right? I mean, he says that we're not trading him, and he loves them, and they're trying to work out a contract. But would it shock anybody if tomorrow Jim Irsay said, "Yeah, we decided to trade Jonathan Taylor to the Dolphins or something"? You know,
No.
Nobody's going to be surprised if that
Irsay's
happens.
history is that with letting Joseph Adai walk, Edgar and James walk, right? And I'm sure there's one other. I'm blanking. Marshall Faulk, I believe.
Well, Marshall Faulk, that was, if I remember correctly, and the chat can help us out. I thought that was a trade with the Rams where he traded Faulk and then ended up taking Edger and James early in that.
No,
NFL draft.
I'm saying is that he just he doesn't value the running back position.
Washes his hands of them and is always constantly getting younger. Yeah, and
you know what the funniest part about
I forgot about Joseph Adai. Holy cow! I remember
and all of that, all those names. He also sent the first for Trent Richardson and all of that too, just to buck the trend there. I saw his old tweets on that. I was not on the Twitter or X platform at that time, as I was like 13, and he had some tweet like 30 minutes before the trade officially was announced. It was like, this news is going to shock the world. And like people were like fishing it up. But yeah, I mean, who knows what the deal is with there. I wanted to ask you another name. Jerry Jeudy falls to the 709. Me and Terp had talked about it, kind of the main event. I don't remember. I think he still might have gone late 5th. Where Jerry Jeudy is at the 709. Uncertainty, hamstring injury. Obviously, that could be a reoccurring injury, very easily re-aggravated. It is a grade 2. It's not the worst one, but he's missing time. It could be anywhere from the first couple of weeks to 6 weeks. Who knows of the season? He was at the 709 here. Feels though to me though, if Jerry Jeudy returns maybe a little ahead of schedule, that could be a really good value as wide receiver 34 for Team 9 here.
I am not a Jeudy guy. I've never really been a Jeudy guy. The injury kind of just cements it for me, although I am a guy who likes getting value. Yeah. And you're talking about the value of Jerry Jeudy as almost a full round of where he normally goes, at least over the last 48 hours in this tournament. So Frank Imbornoni takes him there as his number 4 receiver. I was talking with somebody today, and they were telling me like 6 weeks for Jerry Jeudy. And while there is a non-zero chance of that, I'm leaning towards more that he might miss week 1. But I think like anything, it's tough for me to see him missing week 2 and beyond. Now, it's a soft tissue injury, and those affect different people in different ways. I understand that. But I think historically, if we look at this, and the fact that Denver said today, George Payton said that they're not putting him on extended IR at all. So obviously they believe that he's going to come back sooner rather than later. It's not like they've addressed the wide receiver position. After not only his injury, but Tim Patrick's season-ending injury as well. They could have gone out and gotten somebody else, but I think that they're good with Sutton and Mims until Jeudy comes back. And then once Jeudy comes back, they're going to have 3 guys that they can count on. So it's just all about getting Jeudy on the field here and getting him healthy. This is the other thing, too, that we can talk about in Jeudy and how it relates to Jonathan Taylor. What are we doing when we're drafting high-stakes fantasy football? We're taking calculated risks, right? Because we're trying to guess the right players to draft at our spot. We're trying to get the players that are going to score the most points. We're also trying to figure out these guys that are hurt or suspended or holding out, whatever the reason is that they are not on the field practicing or playing in the preseason games. Whatever the reason may be, that calculated risk of drafting him now, it becomes bigger a week later. It becomes even bigger than that 2 weeks after that. And it gets bigger and bigger, as we get through drafting season. I'd be willing to wager that guys like Jeudy and Taylor they're going to go significantly lower in those big payback and high society leagues than they would in the main event or the Fantasy Pros because of the upside of if you do hit on one of these calculated risks working out for you, that could mean huge money. Now, the other thing to keep in mind with those big paybacks and high societies, there are no sleepers there. Like everybody gets pushed up, those drafts, it's crazy how those go. Where everybody's off the board in round 14 and they still got 6 more rounds to go. It's certainly something. And people saw it when you live streamed the high society last year too. It's very entertaining, very, very fun to watch. And it's going to be fun and maddening trying to figure out where to select Jeudy, Taylor, and players of that same ilk over the next almost 2 weeks.
Oh, Bucky, perfect segue. Next Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, me and Terp streaming live in Vegas, 10K High Society League. So mark your calendars for that. Yeah, my last thing on Judy, I already mentioned it, but just is interesting to me. As you said, seems like the timetable anywhere from maybe missing 1 to at the most maybe 3 weeks is seemingly what it is.
And how long has he already been out? Has he already missed a week?
About a week, yeah.
Okay. So if he misses, let's say he misses 2 more weeks, right? Well, then all of a sudden that means he's probably not playing week 1, but week 2 he could be back, right? And that would mean missing essentially 4 weeks. So like we got to, I know it's weird to think about. It's hard for me to think about because I think like if you say Jerry Jeudy's out 6 weeks, I immediately think, oh my goodness, week 7 is the next time he's going to be back. But you got to count the preseason time too as well.
And again, as you've been saying, if it happens to be week 2 he comes back, Team 9 here is getting Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver 34 before the injury was going as wide receiver 19. So, I mean, you're getting basically that discount on someone who's missing a week. Now, granted, who knows how long it takes him to get up to speed with the injury. I wanted to ask you, I'm always just asking you stuff. It's also sometimes me bouncing my opinion off of you. Probably one of the highest risers on my board. I'm buying into the Zay Flowers hype. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I love. I was all over the injury. It puts a little damper on it because I think it could. I was anticipating maybe him kind of having a slower start with Lockett and DK there and then really establishing himself in the second half of the season. But then the injury might kind of push that timeline even further back than I originally anticipated. But Zay Flowers, I know there's issues with historically of Baltimore developing pass catchers, but every report has been great out of training camp, which for most people, I guess it is. But I'm just buying into what he brings to Baltimore, how Todd Monken's going to use him, and Lamar Jackson throwing the ball a little more and to more guys than just Mark Andrews.
I think as far as the Flowers hype goes, there's not that many. I mean, there's reasons out there why you wouldn't want to draft him where he's going, but I think there's so many good reasons to look at him. I still remain concerned and confused, not necessarily in that order, on why Baltimore decided to give all that guaranteed money to Odell Beckham, because sometimes we use that as a rubric, not a rubric, but as a guide in our mind.
Keep Lamar happy. I mean, genuinely, that might have been one of the reasons.
And it could be, but I don't think it's like it almost like they were bidding against themselves. So why give all that money? So I remain bearish on him. I'm not an Odell Beckham guy this year. Rashad Bateman, I'm definitely out on him. The only picks I have of him is the FOMO picks, right? Where it's just like, okay, just in case I'm wrong with Bateman, I better grab him in a couple of spots. Mark Andrews has already been reported as the go-to guy in Baltimore by several of the beat writers. If there is a receiver that has been garnering the most positive press there, it's by far and away Zay Flowers. Making great plays every day. We saw in the preseason game how good he looked as well against the Commanders. So, I know he's a rookie. I know it's Baltimore, but remember Todd Monken's there too, a guy who loves to throw the ball all around the field. This is not Greg Roman's 3 yards in a cloud of dust Baltimore Ravens offense anymore. This is going to be a more high upgraded, I don't want to say air raid, but definitely more of a emphasis on the passing game, right? And if that's the case, who are the beneficiaries? Well, right now, I think there's 3 of them. I think it's Jackson, I think it's Andrews, and I think it's Zay Flowers. Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman in best ball leagues, okay, I can get on board with that. But for me in a managed league like this, I'd be paying up for Zay Flowers as he goes at the 809 tonight to Lee Snyder. So I think that's a great pick for his number 4 receiver.
Rich Billion makes a great point in the chat, Balky. Quarterbacks are getting pushed up this draft. We've seen way more. Tua by a round. Deshaun Watson goes about around, over a round earlier. Dak Prescott normally goes at the – trying to find Dak. I've lost him on my.
He fell quite a bit this weekend. I would tell you, Aiden, for whatever reason, when we were drafting it at the KFFSC, he oftentimes was there well below his ADP.
Yeah, but Dak in the Fantasy Pros, the last 2 days, he might have been falling here too. And I'm sure some of that the Trey Lance, the dampers, what's the deal going on, and Dallas's belief in him. But he normally goes at the 1106. He goes at the 806. Tua normally goes at the 1007. He goes at the 12. So just an interesting draft trend in this specific room. Quarterbacks are getting pushed up.
Yeah, and I don't really know. I mean, like a lot of times they get pushed up because of what happens earlier in the draft. But Mahomes at the 211, okay, maybe slightly early, but not really. Hurts at the 305, Josh Allen in the 3rd round. Yeah, I mean, maybe it was the Burrow pick. And I know that's not too far off his ADP. But at the same time, he is hurt right now. And to draft the quarterback that early who's dinged up. maybe the other people who were, drafting the Tagovailoas, Watsons of the world, Prescott, even. I think those are the three that stand out to me. They're like, okay, well, if the injured guy is going to go up there, then I got to start thinking about quarterback earlier than I would. Team number one, Dallas Gower's, he already had his tight end, so he could, interrupt his running back receiver stacking to draft a quarterback. You'd say the same thing about the Cheetahs from Team 7. That's Michael Rinaldi. He already had Kyle Pitts, so he could actually go after a quarterback there. Watson too. Dallas Goedert goes to Ryan Bobson here in the at the 7-11, or excuse me, the 5-11, and then 2 rounds later, he's able to take Deshaun Watson. Don't know if I would have, given you only got 2 running backs on the board, but Chubb and Jones are a pair of good ones. So he went with I say the luxury pick there with Watson, but maybe it was just a pick that he made above ADP. That doesn't necessarily make it a luxury pick, but it makes a pick that he had convictions in to get his quarterback there.
Because we're men of the people, we love answering the chat's questions. Balky, I'm going to direct this one to you. I know we already kind of touched base on him earlier in the show, but let's go back to him. Project Christian Watson this season. Does he have legit top 12 wide receiver production possible from Boomtown 89ers?
All right. Yes. Well, I mean, okay, so these questions are always interesting to me. And I like to frame it when we do the shows like, what's going to happen, what will happen, rather than what could happen or what can happen, right? Because Watson, I mean, he could finish as a top 5 receiver this year. I mean, it's not a large chance, but it's a chance. And so for him to finish top 12, I could easily see that. He stays healthy all season. The connection between Watson and Love, I mean, if you've watched the preseason games and read what the beat writers are saying is going on at practice, like the connection between Watson and Love is strong. They seem to be more on the same page. Still haven't been on the same page with the deep ball yet, but that takes time. And in fact, maybe it'll take more than this year. We don't know. But he worked out with Dobbs, did Love, in the offseason quite a bit. And he did with Watson, but really a ton with Dobbs. And that was another reason I was kind of in on Dobbs. But all that kind of stuff, it becomes noise, what they were doing in May and June outside of the facility. Like now we're focused on what's going on in camp, what's going on in the games, what's going on the field. That's what matters right now. What matters right now is that Christian Watson clearly has a connection built up with Jordan Love, a connection that could be very profitable for fantasy owners. So does he have a chance at wide receiver, top 12? Absolutely he does. I don't think it's a better than 50% chance. I think it's more like 25 or 30. But even that, I mean, you're taking him as wide receiver 21. Might be a strong, again, a calculated risk that you're taking to try to win this $1 million.
If someone asked me, Aiden, what was your defining memory from your first year out in Las Vegas for the FFP live events? My answer 100 times out of 100, Balky, would be the Sunday watch party, in which kind of they're at the I forgot what restaurant we were at, but kind of it was a bunch of FFPC.
Oh, this past year?
And specifically Christian Watson's dropped 75-yard touchdown, which the step, and you're just face going into your
okay. Well, it wasn't
seconds.
That. It wasn't that. First of all, we're at Beer Park at Paris.
Yes.
We're watching the games, and that was a 4:25 start, was it not?
Yeah, it was the second wave of games. Yeah. So
at that point, I was a little overtired and punchy from commissioning late Saturday night and commissioning Sunday morning. At that point, I probably had my second beer in me, and I'm getting excited to see Watson and these new look receivers with Aaron Rodgers. And I saw the play, and I thought it was going to be a touchdown. And that was one of the knocks on Watson too. Was he has butterfingers from time to time. And I saw that, and I yelled out, "No!" And I think I called him something, like it wasn't a slur or anything, but I called him something derogatory out loud. And at that point, then I realized how loud I was being in there. I'm like, oh God, this is not.
It was
good.
The first Packers offensive play, I believe.
First play of the season. First play from scrimmage for the season. Yeah, and it was very
depressing. You did like one of those, you half stood up, like you were 75% of the way up when he drops it, and then you screamed. You look around and then you just drop your hands into your face, into your hands, and and then you're just like in the fetal position almost for like 15 seconds.
It wasn't great. It wasn't fun. And I'm glad. And like the way that Watson's season started too, I was like, oh God, I hope that it wasn't a microcosm for how his season's going to go. But after he came back from that concussion against the Bills, I think it was Sunday Night Football, a game where we found out later that a big part of the Packers game plan was Christian Watson that night. And when he went down early, that changed a lot of things of what Green Bay could do in that game. So I think that's another thing working in his favor as well. So there's a lot to like about Watson. The fact that, again, as you said, his ADP stabilized, he makes for a fine selection where he's going right now.
Because there was an initial, not concern, but I remember discussing kind of a month ago, there was some thought like, oh, maybe Watson rises into this mid-third, late third. Because he was rising up boards. And then I'm sure for a lot of people, especially a lot of people who were in on Watson, they were kind of thankful that his ADP stabilized kind of in that mid to late fourth, which is probably where it should be.
You know, what was good for everybody who drafted Watson early was the fact that Love and all the starters were out there a lot more this preseason than Rodgers and the starters were last preseason. And as a result, Watson had more of an opportunity to make a big splash play, like a 75-yard touchdown catch. Had that happened, then all of a sudden you probably would have seen the bump. It never did. So he just kind of stayed where he was at already.
No, yeah, for sure. He's a guy with seemingly a ton of potential to command a ton of targets. And it goes back to, you've mentioned it. I've been seeing there's a lot of people out there drafting in the FantasyPros Championship, drafting the main event, who have a lot of belief in Jordan Love and what he can do in Green Bay, which I'm sure is fueling kind of this idea of a Watson top 12 finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't. The thing, he's got the talent to do it, but Luke Musgrave is going to have something to say about that. Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, they're going to have. I mean, and Love, I don't. Love is not a traditional rookie quarterback. Like technically he's not a rookie at all, but he's been in the league for 3 years now, right? So it's not like he's just going to be out there and either throwing it away or just focusing on one receiver the whole time. Like he's talented enough where he can spread the ball around the field and get it to a lot of his different guys depending upon who's open.
And think I mentioned at the start of the show, there's something to be said. You can't take away too much from preseason, but I was reading kind of the Packers beat reporters were saying they've seen now Love in 3 straight preseasons. He looked exponentially more confident and just better in this one than the previous 2 where he looked kind of shaky. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Which is what we've heard like the last several years. Like year 2, he looks a lot better. Year 1 for him was weird because it was the COVID year. Like it was such a bizarre season for everybody. And I don't, to be a rookie that season had to be really weird, especially a rookie quarterback playing behind an MVP.
And he had negative energy just getting drafted, period. So, yeah.
So then year 2, obviously, things warmed up. Year 3, people are saying he looks good. And now it's like, okay, wheels up for Jordan Love. He's ready to take the reins. I'll say this before anybody starts accusing me of being a Jordan Love homer here. I would not draft him as a top 15 quarterback. I think he's a fringe top 20 quarterback, which means for fantasy, I'm probably off of him unless I have an elite quarterback early and I just want to back up. I would never count on him as my starter. I think he is, at least this season, I think he's going to be a better NFL quarterback than a fantasy quarterback. But next year, if things go the way they're going, could be a huge year for Love.
No, never need to try and apologize for being a homer. If you've watched these streams with me and Terp, God knows the amount of Eagles conversations we have. Would you say this is true or false, Balky? The running back to own in Indianapolis with the Jonathan Taylor uncertainty is Anthony Richardson.
No, that's spicy. I'm going to say no, because Richardson is being drafted as quarterback 11 at the 11:03. Let's throw Jonathan Taylor out of it for the moment. We'll also throw Kenyon Drake out of it, a guy who was being drafted. He's not anymore he won't be anymore because he was cut. It comes down to Jackson, Hull, and Moss. These guys are all super cheap. They won't be cheap anymore. In fact, we'll see what happens with all
I'm
three.
I'm excited to see where they go. Yep.
Yes. But they're kind of lumped in the middle. Jackson was the guy who did it last year. Moss is probably the most pedigreed of the 3. And then obviously Hull is the talented rookie pass catcher, right? So they all have some merit. I don't know how the Colts are going to utilize these guys. If one of them takes the lead over the other 2, if they all play evenly, if they play a hot hand thing where it could be this guy one game, this guy another game. I think the smart play with these guys and the way I would handle it is to continue drafting them fairly late. I don't think I bump any of these guys up because it's a nebulous situation. Like, we just don't know how they're going to be utilized there. And we have to allow for this. Leonard Fournette is out there. Mm-hmm. Kareem Hunt is out there. I mean, maybe the Colts would after week one, when the salaries are no longer guaranteed, maybe they sign a veteran who could take over the backfield and the majority of the touches there. So it seems exciting to get a quote unquote starting running back as late as you can with these Colts running backs in drafts right now. But I think you have to temper that excitement because of the unknown of how these guys are going to be utilized. The fact that there could be another guy that gets into the mix as well. And that Taylor might be back week 5. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's fun to think about, but there's a lot of uncertainty there.
I mean, Rich Bilyeu in the chat makes a great point, and I was going to also bring it up. Kareem Hunt had agreed to a deal with the Saints, and then it was he actually put that on hold because the Colts were expressing a lot of interest. So if I had to guess, if you're asking me my prediction, I assume Kareem Hunt to the Colts gets done at some point, just because there was a pre-existing level of interaction between the two sides to try and get a deal done. So,
the other thing, bear in mind too, that the Vikings cut Dwayne McBride today, which leaves them as and the Vikings fans had correct me, but I think it's just Madison and Chandler, and they already had Kareem Hunt in for a visit too. I mean, I don't really. I usually don't waste my time with running backs like this when I consider who to draft late, because there's a reason these guys are still free agents, and a lot of these guys who have already been practicing know what their role is on the team. And I think it's a low floor, even low ceiling type of addition, which is why in times of uncertainty, unless it's super late, I'm kind of passing because I don't see the upside there.
Yeah, who knows? The only thing I'll say that I slightly consider is last year when Taylor, who had a lot of injury issues last year and missed time, Deion Jackson had some really good games for them. But then Zach Moss is there, and his Zach Moss's current injury timeline almost matches up for a week 1 kind of. He right around then he'll be ready to go. So it just seems like it's going to be a funky backfield, and it goes back to the original question I asked, which is one would assume Richardson is going to take carries away and goal line carries away from some of these guys. So it's a messy situation. And I know Hull has a lot of buzz, but where sometimes in situations like this, there is kind of that buzzworthy rookie who's receiving a lot of praise, or they expended a day 2 pick on. They're like, yeah, I can see that. This situation doesn't have that. You have a lot of names of undrafted 7th round picks or guys who are, as you said, kind of not on a team for a reason at this current moment.
The other thing to bear in mind when you consider Anthony Richardson, historically, mobile rookie quarterbacks don't usually equal great fantasy success for running backs. It's just it hasn't. It's happened, but it's rare. So let's say everything goes right. Let's say Taylor doesn't play all season. Let's say they don't add anybody, and let's say that one of these guys ends up being getting the lion's share of the touches. Well, okay, they're kind of rebuilding this year. Is the offensive line going to be good enough to give these guys fantasy value on a week-to-week basis? And is this guy going to catch enough passes from Richardson? So, even if everything goes the way you need it to go, if you pick right, that's still not guaranteeing fantasy points. It's guaranteeing a piece of the pie, a sizable piece of the pie. But is that pie something that is going to feed 24 people at Thanksgiving dinner? Or is it one of those little individual ones you get at the end of the turkey trot on Thanksgiving? Those individual apple pies. It might not, you could get everything right, and you still might not be able to enjoy the spoils of it.
And it goes back to also another is Shane Steichen comes from that Frank Reich, Nick Sirianni tree. And I believe Taylor's his best year came with Frank Reich, but still that is a coach who comes from a philosophy of running back by committee. And I'm sure now with Deion Jackson, Zach Moss, and Evan Hull as your backs, it's going to be by committee with Anthony Richardson also in the mix. So I'm not expecting, as you said, too high of a bump in Deion Jackson, Evan Hull, but I think we're certainly going to see somewhat of a bump just with at least knowing now that Taylor for sure is not playing at minimum the first 4 weeks of the season. Balky, speaking of running backs by committee, good news for people with Dolphins running back shares, whether it be Mostert, Jeff Wilson, or Devin Achane, that Taylor is not going to Miami.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I was looking over my rosters on the plane back from Louisville, and I'm like, my goodness, if Taylor gets traded to Miami, I will never be a Devon Achane fan because I have way too many. I don't know how I drafted. I must have drafted Devon Achane like every other draft or 2 out of every 3 drafts. So I was really hoping that Taylor wouldn't go there. And by the way, that's kind of a mess right now too with Wilson and Mostert. I think a lot of people, myself included, are kind of betting on the talent of Achane, the draft capital of Achane, but also understanding that Mostert and Wilson understand Mike McDaniel's offense a lot better than Achane does at this point. They're the veterans. They've done it before. Like you kind of need one or both of those guys to get hurt to have Achane unleashed. And even then, I don't know. I think you want one of them hurt because if both of them get hurt, then you're talking about giving Achane maybe more touches than he can handle as far as efficiency goes. So the thing is with Miami, yes, it's great that Taylor's not there, but there's still more that we don't know. And they got a pretty good quarterback and 2 awesome receivers there too. So I say I don't have this is coming from a guy who drafted Achane like it was a bodily function this past weekend. It may seem like I have a good handle on how this is going to go. I don't. Like Achane could still bust. It could be the year, or maybe it's just one of those things where Wilson runs red hot in October, then Mostert crushes it in November, and Achane's just putting up like 8, 9, 10 points a week or something like that, not really doing much for you. So there's a lot of possible outcomes in the Miami backfield too.
I have, when you say you want one of them hurt, I just have this image of you as just like Tanya Harding and like one of Jeff Wilson or Mostert.
No, I know.
And you're just like
pull a Galooly on Mostert's knee. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. But that's the thing. You never root for injuries, but you draft based on this game has a 100% injury rate, right? Like everybody gets hurt at some point. And running backs are basically going through, what was the stat? It's like the force that gets put on their bodies throughout an NFL game. It's like going through like 5 or 6 car accidents every single NFL game. Like, yeah, I'm going to load up on guys at that position because it's literally always next man up more so than any other position in the NFL. So I don't root for injuries. I just draft like I expect them to happen, and they're going to happen.
I mean, if the NFL script writers were a real thing, I still love that joke that kind of went viral last year. It's so easy right in Miami. Raheem Mostert's going to have like 2 touchdowns and 100 yards week 1. We get all excited. Then he comes out in the midweek. Oh, he's suffering from a little bit of knee discomfort. And he gets put on the PUP list because he has like a small meniscus tear. Jeff Wilson does solid. He gets hurt. We all get excited for Achane, who struggles and then has a breakout game. And then he gets hurt. And then it's just a constant rotation of those 3. But if I'm picking one, it's Jeff Wilson, just by product of his kind of success with McDaniel. And Mostert's kind of injury history. I don't think Achane's going to be a factor as much early in the season. But
okay, so just looking at this tonight, Aiden, in the draft, Achane was the 1109, Wilson 1205, Mostert 1202. So they basically went in the span of 9 picks, all 3 of them. Mm-hmm. Normally, when you look at the Fantasy Pros Mojo ADP, running back 48, running back 49, running back 53, Achane, Mostert, and Wilson from 1201 to 1305. So while they're spread out more in ADP, they're still going pretty close to each other. I've always believed that this is a young man's game, and I will, especially at the running back position, I'll always go with the rookie for the upside when you consider how close they are together and at what point in the draft you're investing in them. Not like you have to soak a 4th-round pick to get Achane this year. He's going in the 11th or 12th. So then that makes more sense. Give me the shot on the rookie. I think that's the best advice I can have, but also understand that you shouldn't be counting on him for any kind of efficient every week production because it may not happen.
I think I want to get to, there's a good question in the chat, but my last thought, and you make a good point, is what's frustrating with this backfield is luckily you're only investing, as you said, 11th, 12th round picks on these guys, but this could very well be a backfield, especially if all 3 are active, where you never know from week to week who's going to be delivering. And you put Achane in after a great week where he was on your bench, and then he does nothing the following week, and it's the Raheem Mostert show out of nowhere. So it's going to be a confusing backfield. But as you said, never rooting for injuries, but an injury to one of them kind of, I think, clears up some of the confusion in that backfield. But a good question in the chat, Balky. Mr. Bakes a lot was saying, what's Leonard Fournette's value if he goes to the Colts?
Is
Leonard Fournette okay? We've heard nothing about him other than that one workout, I believe, in New England.
Yeah, he. I guess I have not heard anything that he's battling anything. He's had a
Not
long. I
even
don't.
like that. I just
I
mean like, is he alive and actually doing football related activities? Because in his history, Leonard Fournette and offseason workouts don't usually go together.
That's the issue, right? Because we don't
Yes.
know, is he in football shape or more of a round shape right now,
Yeah.
which is concerning. If he went to Indianapolis, he can catch passes, and he's done it well. He has also shown us that he doesn't necessarily need to catch passes to have fantasy value. My concern is if he goes to Indy, which I don't think he will. That doesn't strike me as a situation and an organization where they're at right now in their trying to win a championship. It doesn't seem like Fournette would be a good match there. If he does go there, he doesn't do much for me. Like, he's still like a late round flyer. Quite frankly, he doesn't change how I draft Jackson or Moss or Hull. You know, he's not really changing that. I think you just lump them in with those other three, and maybe you take a shot on them here or there. But again, it's running back is a young man's game, and I don't think Fournette, after missing all of training camp, not being in football shape. We know he's not in football shape. He could be in good shape, right? But not football shape because he hasn't been doing it with everybody else. So he's already behind the 8 ball there. He's getting a little bit older, and then sometimes that opens you up to injuries that you're not used to having that he maybe hasn't had before. I see a lot of cons. I don't see much upside if he goes to Indianapolis.
I agree with you on all accounts. There's part of me, the Colts wouldn't be the landing spot, where I do feel as though you reflect on what Fournette did last year, and I believe he was I want to say a top 12 or at least top 15 running back still, and that was behind really an awful O-line that I don't think helped him out. Granted, a lot of that was also he got a ton of checkdowns from Brady, and obviously White kind of at least not supplanted him, but took over a good share of the carries. I do still think, if in shape, Fournette does still have something left to give to an NFL team, but he might be, as you've kind of elaborated, past being a fantasy productive running back. There were certain maybe landing spots where I could see kind of the intrigue with him, but Indianapolis would not be one. But I mean, we talked about Indy a lot, but in that 13th round, Deion Jackson and Zach Moss are the first two. Zach Moss and then Deion Jackson, RB58 and RB59, which honestly sounds about right. That's what you're saying. There's probably a little bump by a couple of rounds, but these guys were going in the about 15th round, I would say. I don't quote me on that, but just off of just the eye test, what I've been seeing when I've been doing these live drafts and checking in on the drafts going off, it's been about 15th round, so they get a little bit of a bump, but it feels about right. You're taking a flyer on maybe one of them. The Indianapolis Shane Steichen does give one of them kind of a lead role for 4 weeks at minimum.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted here a little bit.
No, please.
I paid attention to what Rich Bilyeu, guy who is not only drafted on this channel but hangs out with us to watch drafts on the channel with us, which we appreciate. Brady Henderson, who covers the Seattle Seahawks for ESPN, has footage posted on X.com of Jackson Smith-Njigba not only back at practice but catching passes with a cast on. I guess the conditions are a little bit wet there. He had one bobble. But I see the video here of him catching at least one pass, and he looked all right. And now the fact that he's already on the field 12 days before the start of the season, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who, by the way, was going at 8:02 as wide receiver 39 over the last 48 hours in this contest, a lot of people got some discounts on him. And I think those discounts are probably going to be ending tonight. He goes in this draft at 8:11. That might be the latest we see him the rest of the season. That's very interesting to see. And I don't know how much it affects Metcalf or Lockett. People maybe push them up a little bit, knowing that Smith-Njigba was probably going to get off to a slow start. And he still might. But Smith-Njigba is going to be going up draft boards tonight now.
Can I push back on one thing, though?
Yeah.
And this is not mine. I was also always have Twitter open because I'm always paranoid. The chat always tells me that there's going to be big breaking news. So I have it up. I saw that as well. And again, these I follow all those kind of sports doctors who kind of they tweet about as I think I told Terp this on Sunday's main event. I blindly trust these people. They could say the most asinine, just completely wrong thing. I'd just be nodding my head like, "Yep, they know what they're talking about." And Pro Football Doc tweeted, I'll give him credit. Yes, this is a good thing. You're back. The only thing that he says to keep in mind is there's with catching the passes, the way you're able to catch it, there's less of an injury of kind of re-aggravation, or it's obviously still kind of healing. He can't block yet, which is probably a critical role he would need to do to get ready for game shape. Obviously, they didn't put him on PUP, which is already a good sign that he might be only going to miss 1 to 2. But this idea of if you would expect the Seahawks to take it easy, don't rush him. But I think the next sign I have to see is that he would be ready to block and kind of handle the contact versus just catching passes. But as you said, this is by no means a bad sign. I think this is a good sign.
Very good.
You hope he's on track for week 1. But I do still think there's going to be maybe a little window that I think if I'm drafting Smith and Jigba, I always kind of anticipate him. He's probably going to miss 1 to 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of the season at most. He'll be back by week 3. And that didn't change my thinking too much. It just adds that little kind of road bump where rookie receivers always kind of have that acclimation period. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And people in the chat on Sunday were making great points. Smith and Jigba, and Balky, I don't know if you were watching. I said Smith and Jigba is going to be the guy for next year. All the Twitter accounts were always posting Jackson Smith and Jigba was wide receiver 8 from weeks 10 on. Like the whatever stat for like the second half, he's going to have a monster second half of the season. I think he's going to really explode there. And the only thing was in my head with this injury was I think it could maybe delay that ascension of JSN.
Yeah, and if it delays the ascension, if you have a good enough team around him where you can get to your league playoffs and then eventually the championship round, you're going to be in much better shape. Sometimes I think we draft for the end of the season way too much, and that's definitely true in best ball. But we draft for the end of the season way too much, forgetting that we have to get to the end of the season and the playoffs are having a good team to get there. So, with Smith and Jigba, I don't think this injury makes – I think all these receivers, these rookie receivers this year, Zay Flowers included, by the way, probably going to get off to slow starts. Their best football this season will be in the second half or the last third of the season, like when there are no rookies anymore. Smith and Jigba was probably already going to have that happen to him to a certain degree, and then this wrist injury just confirmed it. And he could still he could still come back and have the same type of season that he was going to anyway, even without this. But that remains to be seen. It's all about taking this goes back to the calculated risk thing. The risk of taking Jackson Smith and Jigba 2 hours ago, let's say, if you weren't privy to the information, was much bigger than it is now. All of a sudden, that risk just got a lot smaller after we see this. Not necessarily because he could be back week 1, the fact that he's further along than a lot of other people thought he was going to be.
I think this idea, as that's perfectly said, is for a lot of people, I don't think it changes his timeline drastically, but the fact that he's practicing is nothing but a good sign and probably means, most importantly, he'll probably be in somewhat of a game shape. At least he's not just missing all these practices, even if he misses a week or two. But I'm looking at it, the last 48 hours, can you believe this? The latest he's gone in the last just 48 hours is the 10-10. Even with the wrist injury. For me, as someone who, if I was drafting in these leagues, the fact that they didn't place him on PUP is just a positive to me. It's just something like, oh, they're only anticipating maybe a week or two, and this obviously I think confirms that suspicion that I had. But falling to the 10-10, oh my, that is pretty crazy to me.
It is, and I'm not trying to explain it away, but I think about the way the FFPC structures its starting lineup, where you have that dual flex and where you have tight end premium. It's not like it doesn't become where you have to make sacrifices at the receiver position just to field a decent wide receiver starting lineup out there. Like, you only have to play 2 of them. And when you only have to play 2 of them and one of these receivers, like Smith and Jigba, is hurt and he starts falling, there are a lot of different ways that you can look in the 9th and 10th round, not only at tight end, but running back as well, and maybe some other receivers. So for me, in a contest or, like the main event or the FantasyPros Championship, it's easier once a guy tumbles. It almost seems like that mountain that he's slipping down, that hill he's slipping down, is much steeper because it's difficult for guys like that to get stopped. Whereas, let's say you're playing somewhere or you're playing like a local league or whatever, where you got to start 3 receivers plus a flex. Well, then the fall for him is like, it's more like this, right? Because how far is he going to fall when wide receivers are still at a premium? But this, where you can, formulate a 3 tight end lineup, a 4 running back lineup, why would you take the risk of Smith and Jigba when there's so many other good choices out there and you're not married to the position scarcity?
Yeah, it goes at the 10-10 is the latest. That's 118. The latest he's been since April 1st in the FantasyPros Championship is pick 118. So in the last 48 hours, we've seen the latest Jackson Smith and Jigba has gone in the entire contest, which is just is a bit crazy to consider. I think you make a good point saying you're not trying to rationalize it or explain it, but just as the way the FFPC works, how it could happen. But that must I'll just say this: whoever got Jackson Smith and Jigba at the 10-10 within the last 2 days with this news has to be feeling just utterly fantastic. Yeah. They must be patting themselves on the back.
Well, it's probably the same feeling that the Deion Jackson, Evan Hull, and Zach Moss owners were feeling when we found out Taylor is going to miss the first 4 weeks of the season. Maybe not to this degree. Maybe you're happier with JSN, but yeah, certainly as far as being unique, I mean, that is pretty unique to get Smith and Jigba at the end of the 10th round.
I mean, and you mentioned Hull, Moss, Jackson. I just remember it was probably about 2 weeks ago. I think they really started cropping up in the last couple of rounds of the draft, and we started discussing it on these live streams. Oh, just keep an eye on them, and then it's obviously boomed, and now it's maybe hitting its peak with the news that Taylor's out the first 4 weeks. I'm gonna ask you 1501 here. Does Deuce Vaughn have a legitimate role as a Pollard to Tony Pollard, or is this just kind of a fun story, or does Deuce Vaughn have actual juice and maybe being kind of a fantasy relevant back in Dallas? Yeah,
I am not a Deuce Vaughn guy. I had plenty of people in Louisville tell me I need to be a Deuce Vaughn guy. The name that keeps coming up over and over again is Darren Sproles, which, I mean, that dude, he was an all-pro. Like, is Deuce Vaughn going to be an all-pro? I don't see it. I'll say that. However, I did try to draft him in a couple of spots. Again, FOMO picks. Just want to make sure I get him somewhere, right? There is something to be said in Vaughn's favor here of the Cowboys cut Malik Davis, right? Mm-hmm. And the only running backs, at least to my knowledge, that they have behind Pollard right now, who, by the way, is not a large running back himself.
No, for a team that wants to run the ball a lot.
Exactly.
They're running out the smallest dudes to run it.
And that's my point. Like, you have Rico Dowdle, who he's probably like 6'1", 215, 220, something like that. Maybe not that big, but he actually, you would think, like, he could be the part of a committee that can handle the between the tackle stuff. And I'm sure they're going to work Pollard quite a bit as well. But to have Deuce Vaughn as a guy who is an expert in pass catching, is great in space as your number 3 running back with no other competition there. To me, it makes some sense. 1501 tonight for Dallas Gowers as his number 5 running back. I'm on board at that level, but I'm certainly not. Here's the thing: I'll draft Deuce Vaughn, but I'm not expecting much from him. And in fact, if he doesn't show anything the first few weeks, guess who's going to be the first guy cut off my team when the bye weeks hit? It's probably going to be him, right? And that could be to my own detriment. But for me, when I'm taking running backs that late, I want to take running backs that have a chance of being the bell cow if given the right opportunity. Gus Edwards, perfect example. A guy who does not have the upside or maybe the sexiness of Deuce Vaughn, but I'll feel much better about him touching the ball 15 touches in a week if Dobbins goes down than I would Deuce Vaughn. Kareem Hunt, you can make the case for him. Now, I'd probably take Vaughn over Hunt, but you can make the case that I'm going to take Hunt because that dude is a former rushing champion. He's shown that he could carry the ball 15, 20 times a game. And that is not, I mean, I feel comfortable in saying we are not going to see that from Deuce Vaughn this year. And that's the issue I have. It's fun to be a gadget guy and get, 9, 10, 11 points every week. That's fine. But, you want to increase the variance here with your running backs. You want to start those guys that have the big opportunities that week. And it's tough for me to see if Pollard was to ever go down, that all of a sudden Vaughn is be a must start.
All summer, I was waiting for the Dallas to inevitably re-sign Zeke, and that was just, and then he didn't. Yeah. He goes to New England. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like week 2, Leonard Fournette signs, or Hunt has interest, or I was waiting. Is there a cut candidate out there?
Emmitt Smith maybe comes back to Dallas. He could probably still ball a little bit. Herschel Walker, get him down. Tony Dorsett.
As a guy who loves Pollard, it's just great, but I'm just. There's like a term for it where even though everything seems like it's going to be fine, there's just that gut feeling of the Cowboys have to sign someone, right? They're going to. They want to run the ball, and they just haven't. And that's I've been waiting for full steam ahead on Pollard. I think we said at the very start, the earliest he's gone is the 107. I wouldn't be surprised if he starts really kind of consistently going first round, the closer and closer we get to that. But yeah, Deuce Vaughn is a change of pace. I think there is something you said. Dallas likes kind of mixing it up, but it's just a matter of.
Well, with Kellen Moore, they did. But with Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer, that's it. You know, and that's a great thing, too. It's like we had Tab Wheeler, former guest co-host of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. He's saying that he's buying 20th round Rico Dowdell. And to me, that's the perfect 20th round running back, because if Pollard was to go down, I would, and a Brian Schottenheimer offense, totally trusting Dowdell over Deuce Vaughn, you know, from a volume standpoint. He'll get goal line. Deuce Vaughn won't. At least I don't think he'd get goal line, but you never know, I guess. And if it doesn't work out, or if they sign Fournette, well, Dowdell will be cut. He's 20th round. Who cares? The guy, and I don't think it really affects Deuce Vaughn either. Like if they were to sign, you know, a bruiser like that, Fournette, Hunt, or whatever, I don't think it really affects Deuce Vaughn at all in the 15th round. I could still be fine with that pick. Where it does hurt a little bit is if you're drafting Tony Pollard at his ceiling, which is fine right now. But after week 1, or if he goes down, then it could be very interesting.
I do think it is funny. You talk about ability to stay in the headlines relative to fantasy football. Two aging, possibly washed running backs, and Kareem Hunt and Fournette have dominated these kind of late round conversations. On every
okay, but but the reason why that is because everybody else knows. Like when you're looking at these running backs late, you know what the role is going to be for these guys on their team. You know what team they're on. You know what they're going to be doing. You know what their upside is. You know what their floor is, right? Everything, all the information's out there. What we don't know is these unsigned guys, and especially the guys who have done it before, who've been fantasy, great fantasy assets for you to draft. Leonard Fournette, how healthy is he? Or how in shape is he? What team's he going to go to? What will his role be there? When you have all these other factors, that like unknown factors that we don't know about, that's what gets us so excited about drafting players like that. Because yes, there is downside, but there's still a lot of upside if it does work out, and perhaps more upside than some of these other guys late. Although I do like the Keontae Ingram and Kyron Williams picks that just went in the 16th round here to Jim Herezi and Mike Rinaldi in the 16th. I like those picks too. And Fournette goes right before that. So the thing is, when you're talking about late round running backs, when a guy's not even on a team, we just don't know, and that's what makes the conversation so compelling. Maybe it's not the right choice to draft him, but it's very, very compelling.
And I think one last point to add on to that, it's also compelling to talk about them, because if they do sign, we don't know who they're going to be taking away from this late in the game. You mentioned Kyron Williams. Please, can you talk about him a bit? Because he's been a guy that we've been seeing moving up draft boards from undrafted to here he goes to the 1606.
I think the reason for it, I'm going to pull up the report right now that I saw. I think it was Thursday. I saw this report, and it kind of, I think I still drafted Cam Akers in one, maybe two spots. I think just one spot. But Kyron Williams became a guy that I became very excited about drafting. Jordan Rodriguez, who covers the Rams for The Athletic, said that the Rams are going to utilize Williams and Akers early in the season, but she thinks Williams is going to have a chance to emerge as a threat in the passing game. Now, that's some loaded language in there, but still, the fact that these guys are working together and Akers isn't dominating there, especially the way he ended the season, and Williams is going super late. Like, yeah, then that all of a sudden becomes very interesting. I was drafting, I can't remember what night it was. I think it was sometime Saturday afternoon. And I was getting Sean Tucker, who I've actually the shine has been lost on Sean Tucker now after we found out he's running with the threes. But I was getting Sean Tucker and Kyron Williams late. And then this one draft, I was planning on taking him in a couple of rounds. And all of a sudden, some idiot drafts him a couple of rounds before me. And he's not an idiot, but I look over, and it's Adam Krautwurst talking to his buddy. I'm like, oh, stinking Adam Krautwurst is over there now. And I know I'm not going to get Kyron Williams and Sean Tucker as late as I had been, but Williams is a guy that kept ascending this past weekend. He's probably going to be ascending again, 16th round here. I think if you don't have Akers, in the Fantasy Pros Championship, and I don't think who drafted him tonight. That was Michael Rinaldi. He doesn't have Akers. I think that makes for a very interesting running back choice at the end. And by the way, I like a lot of these running back choices that he was making back to back to back. Foreman, Gus Edwards, and Kyron Williams. Guys that if the opportunity presents itself to them, they can end up having big weeks.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I would love just a list of all the random names I've bought into late in drafts that just completely amount to nothing.
But that happens. That's drafting.
But if 10 years you showed me hey, Aiden, in 2023, you loved Sean Tucker for a 8-day window in August where you were just advocating for him as a possible sleeper, and then nothing comes of it. I don't know, if you had told me that Kyron Williams would be a kind of a relevant fantasy player after his freshman year at Notre Dame when he burst on the scene, I'd be like, oh yeah, easily. And then he kind of fizzled, and obviously I believe he went undrafted or drafted super late. But it goes back to also just Sean McVay. He finished right. It was really a lot of what we're basing Akers on is opportunity, because there's no one seemingly there for competition, and 3 total games from last year how he finished so strong, and just that seemingly potential of, well, if he really gets back to what we know Cam Akers was pre the Achilles injury, you have a really possibly not a league winner, but a really good fantasy back at a 7th round price. But there's just something there. There hasn't been overwhelmingly positive reports, as you mentioned. The reports are where, Kyron Williams is going to have a role. Akers isn't blowing anyone out of the water. Sean McVay doesn't like him. It's just kind of a situation, and that could be a really bad offense too on top of that. So just some uncertainty there. Again, you mentioned it. I think your rationale is perfect in the way fantasy owners should be thinking in these late stages, is you're almost taking dart throws on guys. Is imagine the best case scenario, especially in the Fantasy Pros Championship. You can cut these guys if it doesn't work out. In the best case scenario, if the lead back goes down, what's the opportunity going to be? What's has the buzz been overwhelmingly positive? Just stuff like that to consider. Kyron Williams seems is going to at least has caught the eye of Sean McVay. And if Cam Akers goes down or Cam Akers falls out of favor for it feels like the 25th time, then Kyron Williams is gonna outproduce his running back 64 ADP. Please.
And the other thing too with the Rams is they don't strike me as a team that would go out and grab somebody, right? Unless it's like some younger player that they want to try to develop. But they're not in the Fournette sweepstakes. They're not in the Hunt sweepstakes. They're just not. And so if it is just Akers and Williams and rolling with those 2 guys all year, Williams is going to have certain weeks. You're going to know when to start him, and he could come up big for you, especially for those teams that try to figure out their second running back later in the draft. He's a perfect guy to take later on.
Turp mentioned it on Sunday's show, and I don't know how likely it is. LA got their Super Bowl, but they're not a team right now with the current makeup of the roster that can contend for another one. Who knows where Stafford's at? They're a team that I almost wonder if they have just the number of pieces to not be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, but they probably should be. And at minimum,
they are. I think they are.
You think that mainly the reason I say that is I have such an image. The Cardinals, I think, are just going to be so bad. You're going to have to be especially like beyond bad to beat the Cardinals this year. With how
you make a case for that, but I always have, especially with preseason.
Do the Rams have their first round pick real quick before we even continue, or do the Lions?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm going to look that up. But
please, before we go on this ramble about them with Caleb, I don't know if they do now. I think the Lions might only had one, like they had 2 from the year straight. But anyway, if you're looking it up, but continue with your thought process. I cut you off.
All right. So the Rams. Let's see here. It looks like I think they do have their 2024 pick. The Cardinals have the Texans, the Bears have the Panthers, and the Texans have the Browns. But the Rams and the Packers might have the Jets. We'll see. But the Rams should have their own pick. Trying to rate who's going to be terrible in the preseason, like who's going to be the worst team. I think we could figure out who the bad teams are, but not the worst teams. And for me, it's always been like, anytime everybody's telling you how terrible and how bad a team's going to be, then watch out for them, because they could end up, the Texans, didn't the Texans do that to themselves last year where they could have had the number 1 pick and then they didn't because they ended up winning a game late in the season or whatever it was,
Yes.
So yeah, the Cardinals are going to be bad, but there's more than a non-zero
They
chance
went
that
for
the Rams
two.
are
The Texans went
right.
for two. That was that was what it was.
There's a more than a non-zero chance the Rams could be just as bad or worse than the Cardinals this coming year too. I think the Cardinals are being more forthright and showing that they are not in the interest of trying to win football games this year.
And baseball games for that matter too.
Yeah, they're
Both
not
Cardinals.
winning any baseball games. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I could easily see the Rams having the first overall pick, and I don't know what future picks they've traded, not besides their first pick, but who's to say that they wouldn't give up a boatload of picks again to move up and grab Caleb Williams, even if they're not the first overall pick? You know, they've done it before.
I think any team who would trade away Caleb Williams, the GM should be fired on the spot. But yes, who knows? I think I got kind of sidetracked from my original point, which is what I was saying. Terp was saying is there could be very bad. Who knows? The contract might be right, but Cooper Kupp could get traded. They could shut Stafford down. You never know what.
Shut Aaron Donald down. Aaron Donald's
exactly.
another guy that could get shut down too.
If they just kind of looking back at those, and my point is that if Cam Akers, if Sean McVay goes, this is the final straw. Let's just see what Kyren Williams has. Let's just see what we have here as potential building blocks for this next wave of the Rams. So who knows what's going to happen with it? It was all back to I like the Kyren Williams pick because the Rams could eventually just be in punt it mode, in which means Kyren Williams and even Zach Evans could be getting run down the stretch in this season. So who knows there? On the Cardinals, just while we're on them, because there's only been so much discussion, they've been moving a lot of players with 1 year left on the contract, which is smart. Some would say they're selling super cheap, like the Isaiah Simmons deal. I believe they sent an O lineman. But Marquise Brown only has 1 year left on the contract. Now, some would say maybe you keep him so Josh Dobbs, assuming the starter. Who knows when Kyler's back? Maybe you give Clayton Tune some run to see what you have if you have something there in the 7th round QB. Do you think Marquise Brown, though, gets traded? Because he fits the mold of someone who might be moved. And should that maybe be buying him? He's wide receiver 44, and the fact that maybe a better offense could be selecting him?
Anytime anybody asks me, is such and such going to get traded? For years, I've always said, no, they're not going to get traded. Trades don't happen in the NFL. Last 4 or 5 years, it's been a little bit different, but I would still bet on him.
Yes.
Yeah, I would still say he probably doesn't. And the other thing, too, is it's fine if he gets traded to another team. But what would you rather have as a fantasy player? Do you want a wide receiver playing on a bad offense where he's the best option? Or do you want him moving to a better offense with a better quarterback where maybe he's the one, or maybe he's the one, but maybe he's the two, maybe he's the three? You know, for me, it's all about targets and volume and getting as many catches and chances to make plays as possible. And I think Marquise Brown, if he goes to another organization, he's traded to somebody else, I don't necessarily know if he's going to have the same opportunity as he's going to have in Arizona. I know Michael Wilson's out there, Rondale Moore, obviously. I feel like there's one other Cardinals receiver that I'm missing.
Greg Dortch.
Oh, Dortch, yeah, of course. So you have all those other guys. Like Marquise Brown stands out to me as the best out of those guys. Moore could change my mind if he stays on the field this year. If Michael Wilson shows out and that size really plays on the field, then maybe Wilson could threaten that. But I mean, Marquise Brown is in a pretty good situation. I don't care if it's Tune or if it's Dobbs or whoever. Like, he's going to get the football and he's going to get it a lot.
I'm surprised his ADP has actually slipped a bit because I remember between him and James Conner, the discussion was, especially after Hopkins was released, was, yeah, the offense is going to be bad, but these two guys are going to get a ton of volume just by product of they're really the only weapons and probably trustworthy. But Brown has been slipping a bit. Obviously, I saw a bunch of footage of, I believe it was joint practice with maybe the Vikings, and he was just getting shut down, which as much as we try not to let it impact our thoughts, it just sometimes happens where you see kind of these negative videos or it's not great. But I mean, I think there is some concern to me at least, the opportunity for getting a bunch of targets as a product of being the clear best receiver, number one, is offset by the fact is I really don't trust Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune to deliver consistent passes to him. Now, this is also me. I'm saying all this. I don't know if I'm anticipating Kyler Murray playing all too much this year, which is a whole nother byproduct. If Kyler Murray comes back in week 5, 6, it goes back to I don't know what the Cardinals' plan would be. You don't want to play out of Caleb Williams if I'm then. You don't want to hurt Kyler rushing back if he looks bad, because then if you do get Caleb Williams as a trade, who knows what the deal is? But if Kyler Murray does come back, maybe a little ahead of schedule, Marquise Brown could return value as a guy who, if you look at last year prior to Brown's injury, but when Brown was playing without DeAndre Hopkins, when Hopkins was suspended, Kyler Murray peppered Marquise Brown with targets.
Being drafted as a number 4 receiver right now, like I said, wide receiver 44 tonight. To me, the risk is pretty mitigated at that point. Who are you getting that has the upside this year? Quentin Johnston is behind 2 guys in Los Angeles. Sky Moore is behind Travis Kelce in Kansas City. I guess you could say Sky Moore has a decent shot of developing to the number 1 receiver in Kansas City. But I just think the Chiefs are going to have a bunch of guys there and not a guy. Brandon Cooks
is their receiver 1.
Exactly. Yes, obviously. Brandon Cooks is going to have to contend with a healthy Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb in an offense that may not be throwing it a lot. Nico Collins, I think, is an interesting, like, poor man's Marquise Brown. I'm not a believer in Thomas. Obviously, Dobbs has Wilson or Christian Watson, excuse me, and all these other guys, Myers, Bateman, Mims. I mean, they're Beckham. They're the 2 or 3 on all their teams, and Marquise Brown is not a 2 or a 3. He is a 1. I understand it's not a great offense, but you got to also understand it's wide receiver 44 in the 9th round.
Yeah, the names you said, and there's also a lot of downside to those names, whether it be injury risk, and there's also, like, look, Marquise Brown's going at the 903. Treylon Burks is going at the 910. Treylon Burks is the wide receiver 2 on a possibly bad throwing offense. And Treylon Burks hasn't proven what Marquise Brown has proven in the league. So I'm with you on that.
And he missed a lot of camp too. So that could be he could be a slow starter.
Balky, my last question for you, and then we'll wrap up our live draft coverage. Your favorite, let's say literally like the last 2 rounds dart throw in these drafts? Because I'll give you mine. And then because you think mine, I've been saying it every time. Josh Downs is going to be fantasy relevant, and I think he's going to be the best fantasy receiver. That offense, passing wise, with Anthony Richardson, going to be kind of a gap year for him, going to struggle. But he and Downs, by all reports, have a connection. I think he's going to be really good as kind of the check down, more so than even Pittman and Pierce, as I think his game probably suits a rookie quarterback with his route running and ability to get open. So I'm all in on Josh Downs as the 18th, 19th, 20th round pick.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I drafted him in a couple of spots. I think the biggest concern for me is not the talent. The biggest concern for me is just how big is that passing pie going to be in Indianapolis. So Downs would make some sense. Fine with him in the 20s.
Let's go Jeff Conklin.
Yes, exactly. Jeff Conklin just took him. The other couple of guys I like in these last 2 rounds, I liked the Rico Dowdle pick. We already talked about that. He goes in the 19th. I'm starting to warm up to Jalen Hyatt a little bit. Giants beat reporter's been pretty positive about what he's been doing. It's not like he's just running 9 routes the whole time, which was my concern. That was going to happen with him in week 1 or in year 1. So I'm warming up to him. Pierre Strong looks like to be the new backup for Nick Chubb. Isaiah Likely, I like this pick for Frank Imbornoni here. It's his 4th tight end, but like Likely has shown that when Andrews goes down, he can do numbers, and that's an interesting guy to keep around. If you can find a way to keep him around all season, Likely might pay off 2 or 3 weeks for you. So I think that makes some sense there. Curtis Samuel, I'm starting to warm up to a little bit, although it's still difficult for me to get behind the 3rd wide receiver on the Washington Commanders offense. I think that you're probably better off going a different route there than the number 3 receiver that, for Sam Howell. But I know a lot of other smart people out there are higher on Samuel than I am. So there's that. Other players that did not go in the last 2 rounds tonight that I like. I saw, well, let's not bring him up. Latavius Murray, I think, is interesting because he's kind of in a fight for that number 2 role with Damian Harris right now. I'm kind of off Harris.
Going to get a lot of touchdowns. That's kind of been proven, right? A lot of goal line carries is available.
Yeah, and I think that with Damian Harris, you got to invest 12 more rounds of ADP or 10 more rounds of ADP than Latavius Murray. So I think he's interesting late. I'm with you on Josh Downs. Let's see who else looks good here. Maybe that's it. I think of all the guys we named. I mean, there's a lot of kickers, obviously, that go in the 20th round. Green Bay defense, I can get on board with them this year as a 20th round pick. I think those guys. I don't have a favorite. Like my kids ask me all the time, Dad, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite this year? I don't have favorites. I just know what I like. Those are the players I like late, but I couldn't rank them for you because ask me tomorrow. The rankings will all be different. Who had the best draft from the TBS? I don't know if it was the guys who actually drafted it. I know Jeff Conklin was in the draft. By the way, shout out to him for taking Josh Downs after we were talking about him.
Yes.
But it seemed like a lot of people liked that draft from the 2 spot tonight with Mahomes, the Mahomes, Kelsey, Andrews stack there.
They had a phenomenal draft. A lot of good drafts here. I do always love, even TBS. I believe they were talking about Team 1. I do like the idea. If you go get your guy, right? If you're confident in that person, you have to trust your belief more than anyone else. So I always respect teams that go out and get their guy. Terp, that's a third time.
We're almost to the end. It's okay. That's fine.
It's all good. Balky, the only thing you mentioned about a couple minutes ago that I did want to bring up is we didn't talk about him when he got drafted in the 10th round. But Nico Collins, I know some people don't buy into preseason usage, but seemed like CJ Stroud's favorite target by a lot. Got a huge target share, got a touchdown in that last game. So just someone to kind of monitor, as maybe a name who's going to outperform that 10th round ADP. That's going to do it for myself and Balky. The FantasyPros Championship drafts are filling every day at myffpc.com. $1 million grand prize, $6 million plus prize pool. The draftathon weekend is coming up, which I'm sure Balky is thrilled to commission all those drafts.
Thank God we have Bryce.
So we have a big weekend upcoming. About what? How many days you said? 13, 12 days until?
12 days. And for anybody, I know everybody always asks, we'll see it in the chat every year. What does draftathon mean? And basically, what we do with those drafts, and I think we're doing. Maybe I shouldn't even be saying this because we're not going to do it. I think we're still doing it. Is for every draft we fill, Labor Day draft, we have historically. Oh yeah, here it is. It's right on the website. I should know this.
Yeah.
So for every draft this year, we always donate $50 per draft to a different charity every year. And then this year we're going to be doing the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. So that's what those draftathon drafts mean. It's not like anything's different in it. Just we try to fill as many as possible so we can help support a charity. Breast Cancer Research Foundation is what we're going to do this year.
So that weekend is obviously the biggest draft weekend of the year, and it benefits a good cause. So go sign up for those drafts right now. That's going to do it for myself, Eric Balkman. Balky, will you be back for High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on Friday?
No, we take, this is what we do every year. After the KFFSC episode, we take 2 weeks off. One Friday for draftathon, one Friday for the live events out in Las Vegas, and then we resume at the Friday after week 1. So no HSFF hour until the season starts. I am planning on doing one final RotoViz high stakes lowdown. I think tentatively we're doing that. I'm waiting for confirmation from my guest. But tentatively, we're going to go live at 10 p.m. Thursday night. Does that work out with? We don't have any live drafts coverage going on then, do we? Thursday night?
Eastern time? No.
Okay. So yeah, so that will be the last show then, and we'll have a ton of live draft coverage on this channel over the next 2 weeks with plenty of action to satisfy all of your live draft appetites for sure.
For sure. So the next time you'll see us on the FFPC YouTube is going to be Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern time. Me and Terp will be covering a live FFPC main event. Next Tuesday, the last FantasyPros Championship Tuesday night live draft coverage. And then Thursday at 3:30, it will be a live 10K High Society League with the live draft board from Las Vegas. And then a RotoViz high stakes lowdown tentatively in the works that Thursday night. Thank you all in the chat for keeping me and Balky company. We will see you guys on Sunday night.